Hello, and thank you for clicking on this video. Before the video starts, I need you to do two things to help this channel grow. One is subscribe down below, and the second is like this video and share it with anybody that you want to spread MMA news to, whether it's family, friends, anybody. I always appreciate your support. And now let's get to the video. Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Russo, and this is the KO Podcast, episode number 50. Yes, we have gotten to 50 episodes on this podcast. Thank you, everybody, for the support. And we have a lot to cover in this episode. We are reviewing UFC Fight Night Blanchfield vs. Farhat. And then, of course, we have PFL is kicking off their season this Thursday, and we have a UFC Fight Night card in the Apex, unfortunately, but it is Brendan Allen taking on Chris Curtis. This is the second time that these two men have fought. Ring that bell. Alright, taking a look at this PFL 1 card. This is the opening card for the PFL regular season of 2024. There are a lot of new faces on this card and also a lot of interesting rematches as well. And the weight classes that will be participating in the regular season bouts are heavyweight and women's flyweight. Let's start at the beginning of the card. This is a showcase bout in the featherweight division. We have Lucas Brennan, who is 9-0 and who was a big prospect for Bellator. He is now brought over to the PFL. He has a really good submission game, so keep an eye out on Brennan. And moving on now to a regular season fight, we have Hackett taking on Bishop. Bishop is 6-0, undefeated. And moving on, we have a women's flyweight bout. We got Kanta Wannabe taking on Shanna Young. And we have a heavyweight bout. We got Steve Mowry taking on Oleg Pavlov. Mowry was on the podcast some time ago, so such a nice guy, and good luck to him in his matchup. We have a women's flyweight bout. We have Talia Santos making her PFL debut, and she's taking on Arlia Joanny, I believe, and Talia Santos, a big signing for PFL. She's 19-3. Let's see how she does in her debut bout. And we have a heavyweight bout. We got UFC vet Blagoy Anavic. He is taking on, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Sergey Bolonsteny. I believe that's how you say his name. And now we have an interesting heavyweight rematch. We have Marcelo Gom. He is taking on Daniel James. These two faced off in a Bellator heavyweight main event bout not too long ago, about a year or so ago. And Gom was having really good success early on in the fight, but then Daniel James came back and knocked out Gom to win that fight in the later stages. Very interested to see the rematch between these two. And we have a women's flyweight bout. We got Dakota Ditcheva, who was the PFL Women's Flyweight Champion in 2023. She takes on Lisa Malden. And as we continue up, we have another exciting rematch. This is actually a trilogy fight. We have Liz Carmouche taking on Juliana Vasquez. This has been a very interesting part of these two women's career. Obviously, the title was on the line for the first two bouts. Liz Carmouche won both of her bouts. The first fight ended a little controversially, but the second fight, Carmouche submitted Vasquez. So excited to see how this third fight goes against these two women. Continuing on through this card, we have a heavyweight bout. We get Dennis Goldsteve, and he is a 2023 and 2022 PFL heavyweight finalist. So he's gotten there, but just hasn't been able to get that championship. He's taken on Linton Vasil, who is coming over from Bellator. He had a really good win in his last outing against Moldavsky, who is in this main event that I'm about to talk about. In this main event, we have a heavyweight bout. We have Ante Delia, who has been a staple in the PFL now for a little bit. He is taking on Valentin Moldavsky, who is part of Fedor Emelianenko's camp. So obviously he has very elite training, and I think this is going to be a fun fight. Now, let's review UFC on ESPN, Blanchfield versus Furrow. And this card had kind of a weird, just a lot of weird instances where, just a lot of eye poking, really. And I'll get to the fights where that played a factor in. So we'll start with the second fight of the night. We had a middleweight bout. We had Andre Petroski taking on Jacob Malkoun, and an insane TKO happens here. Petroski dips his head and tries to shoot for a takedown, and he splits his head open on Malkoun's hip, and it left a big gash in his head. He was dazed and stunned, and Malkoun finished him off with ground and pound. So that was an interesting TKO. Then we had a light heavyweight bout. We had Abo Asan. He took on Anton Cherkaki, I believe that's how you say his name. And Asan gets the KO finish. He avenges his only career loss, which was a sub from Turkjan. And the Pleasure Man is probably not going to be in the UFC. Up next, we had a featherweight bout. We had Denis Bazukia taking on Connor Matthews, and Bazukia gets the third round TKO. We move on to a featherweight bout. We had Julio Arce taking on Herbert Burns, and man, what a KO Arce had. Moving on, we had a women's strawweight bout. We had Vima Janarobi taking on Lupi Gonez, and Janarobi gets the decision victory. Now we move on to the prelim headliner. We had a featherweight bout. We had none other than Nate Landwehr taking on Jamal Emmers. Jamal Emmers looked really good in the early stages of this fight. He hurt Landwehr and even busted him open, but Nate Landwehr gets a KO finish. Pretty brutal. Ground and pound strikes to really put Emmers out cold. Nate Landwehr is just a showstopper. And when he gets on the mic, he just has so many insane quotes. This guy is just an entertainer. Please do not ever have Nate Landwehr on a Apex card. He belongs in front of a crowd. He is such a fan favorite. And now we move on to the main card. We had a welterweight bout. We had a Chidi Njokwani taking on Rice McKee, and Njokwani gets the decision victory. We had a featherweight bout. We had Bill Algeo taking on Kyle Nelson. Kyle Nelson gets the first round TKO. He looked really good in this fight. Really sharp striking from Nelson. And this next fight is where the eye poke situations really come to fruition. We had a middleweight bout with Narsartan Razabovov taking on Sadiquius Dumas. And Sadiquius Dumas got eye-poked. Fight was stopped, I believe. He recovered. And then he gets eye-poked in the finishing sequence. Dumas goes down because of the eye poke, but the referee does not acknowledge that, to call a timeout or anything. Fight continues, and Razibov does what he is supposed to do and continues to fight and gets the TKO on the ground. But, by replay, it was pretty blatant eye poke there that was in that finishing sequence. And now we move on to another eye-poking situation. It was a middleweight bout. We had Chris Weidman, the former middleweight champion. He was taking on Bruno Silva. Chris Weidman was doing really good in this fight. And at some point, he eye-pokes Silva. They stop the fight. Silva recovers. They continue. And then it goes on into the third round, and Weidman double eye pokes Bruno Silva. The referee does not call it an eye poke. Fight continues, but Silva really went down because of the eye pokes. Now, Weidman brought up a good point that, if you get eye poked, don't go to the ground. But, again, probably in a lot of pain. Bruno Silva goes down. Chris Weidman follows him to the ground. And originally it's ruled a TKO victory for Chris Weidman. But after the commission reviewed it, it goes to a technical decision. Chris Weidman is still awarded a unanimous decision win. As I said, he was up 2-0 going into the third. Just interesting circumstances back-to-back in both of those fights regarding eye pokes. And now we move on to the co-main event. We had a welterweight bout. We had Vincent Luque taking on Jaquan Buckley. And I was really excited for this fight. And Jaquan Buckley gets the TKO finish. Vincent Luque pulls guard and instantly regrets it as he's met with ground and pound punches by Buckley. Luque, all he did was cover up. He didn't fight back, and after so many unanswered strikes, the referee had to stop the fight, and Buckley gets a huge win in his career. He is now going to be in the welterweight rankings. Luque, that Jeff Neal fight took a lot out of him. Obviously, that Jeff Neal fight caused brain hemorrhaging and bleeding internally in his skull, so he probably fights really differently. We saw Luque in his Rafael Dos Anjos fight. He fought really calculated and smart, and you can do that with a guy like Rafael Dos Santos because he doesn't have knockout power. But when you're facing a guy like Buckley, he's got knockout power, and when he has you on the ground like that, and he's wailing away with his ground and pound, there's really no escaping that. Now we move on to the main event of the evening. It's a women's flyweight bout. It is for basically the number one contender. And Maran Fiorot gets the decision victory. Fiorot, really a flawless fight for her, except for the first round. Blanchfield got her in a tight submission in the first round, but Fiorot was able to survive that, and she used her movement, and Blanchfield could not really get a hold of her and take her down. After that first sequence where Blanchfield was in the first round able to take Fiorot down, Fiorot, like I said, uses her footwork and distance management to really get a impressive win, so she should be the women's flyweight number one contender. After this Shevchenko-Grasso fight, she's up next. Now to this weekend's action. UFC Fight Night Allen vs. Curtis 2 takes place in the UFC Apex. This was originally a Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen main event, but Marvin Vettori had to pull out of the fight, and Chris Curtis takes this opportunity. Starting in the prelims, highlighting some matchups to look out for. We got a women's strawweight bout. We got Piera Rodriguez taking on Cynthia Calvillo. We also have a women's bantamweight belt. We got Norma Dumont taking on the former UFC featherweight champion Germaine de Randamie. She is back after a 4-year layoff. I believe she had a child. So glad to see her back in the sport. She is 39 years old, so let's see how she looks in the bantamweight division. And we got a welterweight bout. We got UFC vet Court McGee taking on another UFC vet, Alex Moreno. This should be a fun stand-up battle. Now let's get to this main card. We got a lightweight bout. We got Trevor Peek taking on Charlie Campbell. This is going to be a all-action fight. Somebody's going to get put to sleep. Trevor Peek is so unpredictable and also so violent in his MMA fights. And Charlie Campbell's a guy that's not afraid to come forward and meet in the middle. We got a heavyweight bout. We got Valter Walker taking on Lucas Brzezicki. And we got a lightweight bout. We got Encarnacion Bahamondes taking on Christos Gigos. I believe that's how you say his last name. And Bahamondes had an insane knockout a couple years ago. It was a spinning wheel kick KO of Roosevelt Roberts. I watched that live. That was one of the craziest knockouts that I saw live. And that knockout just sticks in my head. Next up, we have a featherweight bout. We got Morgan Cherry taking on Chipe Mariscal. This should be a fun fight. Cherry had a really good UFC debut in his last fight out. Now we move on to the co-main event. We got a featherweight bout. We got Alexander Hernandez taking on Damian Jackson. And now for the main event of this card, we have a middleweight bout. We got Brendan Allen taking on Chris Curtis. As I mentioned earlier, Chris Curtis is taking this fight on short notice. Brendan Allen lost to Chris Curtis a couple of years ago by TKO, but ever since then, Allen's been on a run, and Chris Curtis is always a game opponent. He will fight anyone at any time. This main event should be an action-packed main event. I'm going to take Brendan Allen by submission. I'm not sure about the round, but I'll take Allen by submission. I think he has the superior ground game, and he's been improving a lot recently. And that is going to do it for this episode of the KO Podcast. To stay up to date with the podcast, check out the link tree in all of the social media bios. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. Stay safe, stay blessed. Bye-bye.